The photographer said, "Smile." Gladys didn't smile. She stood at the back of the crowd in a deep purple satin dress, shoulders bare, jaw locked, tears cut clean down her cheekbones like her body was leaking something it had been holding for 5 years. The ocean sat behind the floral arch like it had nothing better to do than watch. The breeze moved her hair. She didn't move with it. Max was kissing Chloe now. Not a shy kiss. Not a polite kiss. The kind of kiss a man saves for the moment he knows he has won. Gladys had paid for the custom navy suit on his body. She had wired the down payment for that ring on her little sister's finger. She had eaten overnight oatmeal for 3 months straight so that Max's rent never bounced, while he told his boys he was building an empire. And here was the empire. The arch, the flowers, the beach, the guests in linen and sunglasses. Her mother somewhere in that crowd, dabbing her eyes at how beautiful Chloe looked. Gladys turned toward the water. She thought, "Just walk." She thought, "Keep walking and don't stop." And then, the music stopped first. Not a fade, not a glitch. A hard stop, like someone cut a wire. Then came the sound, deep, mechanical, final. 6 black SUVs tearing through the manicured lawn of the venue she had toured with Max 2 years ago when he swore it would be their wedding. The wheels chewed up the white carpet runner. A flower girl screamed. Guests stumbled backward out of folding chairs. The doors opened. No one rushed out. No guns drawn. No shouting. Just him. Dooyeon stepped onto the grass in a black suit so sharp it looked like a threat. Dark hair swept back from his face, a neck tattoo creeping just above his collar. Deliberate, unhidden, a signature. He held a single black folder against his side the way other men carry briefcases, like it contained something that could end a room. He didn't look at the bride. He didn't look at the priest. He didn't look at the groom, who had already gone pale. Dooyeon's eyes found Gladys at the back of the crowd, standing alone in her purple dress with tears drying on her face, and he walked directly to her. Past the chairs, past the gasping guests, past Chloe, who was still holding her bouquet, frozen. He stopped in front of Gladys. He extended one hand. No explanation, no introduction. Just a hand outstretched like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was allowed to ask. And for the first time in 5 years, Gladys felt something shift in her chest. Not grief, not defeat. Something that felt a great deal like you were always going to survive this. Gladys took his hand. She didn't think about it. 5 years of weighing every single decision she made for Max, every wire transfer, every covered invoice, every argument she swallowed before it reached her throat. And the one choice that changed everything required less than a second. Her fingers closed around Dooyeon's, and she felt the cool, unshakable certainty of his grip, and she moved. The crowd erupted. "Gladys?" Her mother's voice sliced through the screaming first, sharp, indignant, weaponized with embarrassment. "Gladys Carter, what are you doing? You get back here right now. Do not do this to this family." She kept walking. Her heels punched small holes into the ruined white carpet runner with every step. Overturned chairs on both sides, a groomsman with his mouth open, a bridesmaid recording on her phone, 2 of Dooyeon's men flanking the path like walls, not moving, not threatening, just present in the way of men who have already calculated every outcome and find them all acceptable. Chloe was screaming something from the altar. The words arrived as sound without meaning, dissolving before they crossed the distance. Max had gone completely still, one hand still at Chloe's waist, watching Dooyeon lead his ex-fiancée through the wreckage of his most expensive performance, with the particular paralysis of a man who has built an entire identity on control and suddenly cannot locate it. Dooyeon didn't look back. He walked Gladys through the parting crowd like it was a corridor assembled specifically for him, and when they reached the far edge of the carpet, one of his men stepped forward and opened the rear door of the lead SUV without being asked. The door was already open before they arrived. That detail landed somewhere in Gladys's chest and stayed there. Do-yoon paused at the car door. He turned to her, not for the crowd, not as a gesture, and looked at her face with a focused, unhurried attention that had nothing to do with pity. His eyes moved from her lashes, still damp, to the hard set of her jaw, to the slight tremble in her lower lip she was managing by sheer stubbornness. "You don't have to hold that," he said. Low, just for her. Gladys exhaled like something fractured in her ribcage. She got in the car. The door sealed. The venue, the screaming, the white arch, the ocean, all of it, was gone. And in the sudden, absolute silence of the back seat, Gladys Carter sat with her hands in her lap and understood that she had just walked away from the worst thing she had ever survived, and she was still breathing. She didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Neither did he. Do-yoon sat at the opposite end of the back seat, jacket still immaculate, the black folder resting on his knee, watching the city shift outside the window from beachfront wealth to elevated private highway without apparent interest. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances. He didn't offer explanations she hadn't asked for. He didn't deploy the particular brand of attentive concern that men use when they want a woman to feel managed. He simply let her breathe. Gladys stared through the glass and did the math she had been refusing to do for 3 months. Not the emotional math. She had run those numbers already, in hotel bathrooms and parking lots, and once, at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, standing in the produce section of a grocery store holding a bag of rice she wasn't going to buy, completely unable to move. The financial math? The real number. The figure she had never once written on paper because committing it to paper would have made her feel too stupid to function. She got to somewhere around 400,000 before Do-yoon spoke. $462,000. She turned. He was looking at her. Not at the folder. At her. "That is the total transfer from your accounts to Max Adeyemi's rent, his debts, his personal spending, and the initial capital structure of his company across 58 months. He paused. Give or take what he laundered through Chloe's name in the final quarter. The silence that followed was a different shape from the one before it. "You've been watching me," Gladys said. "I've been watching him," Do-yoon said. "You were the part that didn't add up. Every time I traced his money backward, it ended with you, a woman working double shifts, living on almost nothing, funding a man who told his investors he was self-made." Something moved at the hinge of his jaw, contained, precise. That kind of theft requires a specific kind of contempt. I wanted to understand it. "And do you?" she asked. "Understand it?" "Yes," he said. "He knew exactly what he had in you. That's precisely why he had to remove you before the money became too large to hide." Gladys turned back to the window. The city bled past. She told herself she was fine. She was not fine. But she was something better than she had been an hour ago, and that was enough for now. "We're almost there," Do-yoon said, and his voice had dropped by a fraction, not softer, exactly, but closer. Like a door opened 1 inch. She didn't ask where there was. She found, to her own surprise, that she already trusted the answer. The estate sat behind 2 sets of gates and a long tree-lined approach that filtered the outside world out gradually, like passing through stages of decompression. The eye? Security cameras were mounted high and angled to cover everything, but they were also discreet, the kind installed by people who consider surveillance a private matter, not a display of power. By the time the SUV stopped in front of the main entrance, Gladys felt as though she had crossed into a country with its own pressure and its own weather. The house was not what she expected. She had built a picture of it on the drive. Glass, steel, the architecture of dominance. Cold ceilings and sharp angles and art chosen to intimidate. What she found instead was stone. Warm light from deep inside, a courtyard with a fountain that sounded genuinely, quietly like rain. Inside, Dark wood polished to warmth, not mirror shine. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves with books that had been read. Spines cracked, some horizontal, one with a pencil still slid between the pages. Furniture chosen for comfort and kept, not staged. This man lived here, she thought. Actually lived. A woman named Ji-hee met them at the door and took Gladys's wrap without being asked, said dinner would be ready in an hour, and walked her to a room at the east end of the house where a bath had already been drawn. Warm water, eucalyptus, silence so complete that Gladys stood in the middle of it for a full minute just listening to the absence of noise. On the bed, clothes. Her size? A simple dark dress and a soft robe and everything else that a woman might need after the worst day of a very difficult 5 years. She stood there a moment. She thought about being unsettled by the precision of it. She found she wasn't. She thought, he knew my size before today. He planned for this. She thought, so did I once. I planned for a future with Max. I had a binder, a color palette, a venue deposit that I never got back. She turned on the bath and let the steam come up and told herself that whatever this was, it was not that. They ate at a long table that could have seated a dozen people. Do-yoon sat at the head, gestured for her to sit at the corner beside him, not across the table's full length, not formally opposite, but at the angle where she could see his face when he spoke without having to raise her voice to reach him. He spread the documents between the dinner plates. The contracts were dense, cross-referenced, bound in legal language that would have overwhelmed her 3 years ago. She was not that version of herself anymore. She read quietly while Do-yoon ate and refilled her glass and waited without visible impatience. And the more she read, the more the picture crystallized into something devastating and exact. Do-yoon's syndicate fund had entered Max's company at Series A as its primary institutional backer. On paper, an anonymous investment vehicle with a Hong Kong registration. In practice, Do-yoon held 41% of the equity and 90% of Max's personal debt load through a secondary loan Max had taken against the company's projected valuation, a loan Max had never disclosed to his co-founders, his board, or the investors who had trusted his mythology of self-made success. The company Max had built on Gladys's $462,000 and then stretched further on Do-yoon's money. A man built on borrowed foundations, the whole time calling it architecture. He doesn't know who you are, Gladys said. He knows the fun name. Do-yoon refilled her glass with the same unhurried steadiness he applied to everything. He doesn't know me. That was deliberate. You set him up. I gave him rope. He set the bottle down. Max Adeyemi overreaches every time he believes no one is watching closely enough to catch it. I simply ensured the overreach was documented, legally binding, and attached to his name in a way he could not later dispute. Gladys looked at him over the edge of her glass. Why? Do-yoon was quiet in the way of a man choosing precision over speed. Because the original founding documents had 2 names on them, he said. Yours and his. And then a second version existed with only his name, and a signature on your line that a forensic handwriting analyst flagged as a forgery in 11 minutes. He met her eyes directly, not gently, not with the softness people use when they're about to offer pity, with the flat, clean weight of someone delivering a verdict. Someone erased you from something you built. That is not something I was willing to leave in place. The warmth moved through her before she could stop it. Not the warmth of the revenge. That was a different heat. Sharper and more satisfying, and she would feel it in full later. This was the other kind. The particular and dangerous warmth of being seen by someone who went looking specifically for her. She set her glass down. She looked at the documents. Show me where to sign, she said. Do-yoon almost smiled, the corner of his mouth. Less than 2 seconds. Gone. Gladys caught it and kept it. Here's what she didn't know about what was happening 400 miles away. Max Adeyemi was standing at a white marble reception desk in a resort that cost $11,000 a night, watching the concierge's expression shift for the third consecutive time in a way that polite hospitality training was no longer fully able to conceal. "Sir, I'm very sorry. Run it again." "We have run it, sir. All 4 cards are returning declined." The concierge lowered her voice, doing him the small mercy of discretion. "Perhaps a wire transfer? I know how a wire transfer works." Max pulled out his phone, opened his primary banking app. The balance loaded and he read it twice, then a third time, because the number on the screen was not the number that was supposed to be there. He opened his secondary account. Same impossible figure. He switched to the business account, and the business account no longer existed in the form he understood it to. A notice sat pinned to the portal, dense with legal citation, the letterhead of a law firm he recognized immediately across the top. He recognized it because it was the firm that handled Do-Yun's fund. The cold that moved through him started at the base of his spine and moved upward in a single, slow wave. He stepped away from the desk and called his operations director. 2 rings, voicemail, his CFO, voicemail. The one board member he still trusted. The man answered on the 3rd ring and said, "Max, where are you? There are lawyers in the building. They've had a court order since 4 o'clock." Chloe appeared at his shoulder. She had changed into the honeymoon dress her mother had spent $4,000 on, ivory silk, midtown boutique, a dress meant for photographs that would be framed and displayed for decades. She looked at Max's face and said, "What happened?" He said nothing. "Max." Her voice tightened in a specific way he knew, the way it tightened when she was about to stop performing pleasantness. "What happened to the cards?" He looked at his phone. He looked at the lobby. He looked at his new wife in her ivory dress and he thought, for the first time in 3 months with full clarity, about the afternoon Chloe had slid a folder across a restaurant table and said, "I found a way to get Gladys off the documents. No one will ever know." He had let her do it because it was convenient, because he had needed to believe the success was entirely his, because erasing Gladys from the founding paperwork was easier than admitting that without her floor beneath him, he was a man with an idea standing on air. He thought about Gladys's face the day he left her. She hadn't screamed, hadn't thrown anything, had simply gone very still, the particular stillness of someone absorbing damage that will take years to fully surface. He had interpreted that stillness as defeat. He understood now that he had misread it entirely. He thought about the man in the black suit who had walked straight to her at the altar, past the guests and the chaos and the overturned chairs, without a single glance in Max's direction. "We need to go back," Max said. "Back?" Chloe stared at him. "It's our wedding night." "We need to go back," he said again, and his voice had the quality of a man who has, far too late, grasped the full shape of the trap he walked into. Gladys didn't know about the hotel yet. She was sitting on Do-Yun's terrace with a blanket across her lap and a cup of tea she hadn't requested, watching the lights of the estate bend and dissolve across the surface of the pool below. The night was cool and salt-edged and quiet in the way of places deliberately built to keep the noise of the world at a distance. The purple dress was gone. Jihai had taken it without comment and left her instead in something dark and soft, fabric with a weight to it that felt like a deliberate act of comfort rather than a replacement. She heard Do-Yun before she saw him, the particular cadence of his footsteps, unhurried even, the walk of a man who has never needed to announce himself by rushing. He appeared at the terrace railing and rested his forearms on the stone and looked out at the same ground she was looking at. He had removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. The tattoo at his neck trailed past his collar to somewhere she was not investigating. "The freeze cleared an hour ago," he said. "All 4 of his accounts." Gladys wrapped both hands around her cup. "How is he taking it?" "His calls are going to lawyers who aren't picking up." No satisfaction in Do-Yun's voice. Information, clean and level. "Chloe called her mother 40 minutes ago." "What did my mother say?" I don't know. My man cut the feed at 30 seconds. He looked at her sideways. You can listen to the recording if you want. I don't want, Gladys said. Do-Yun nodded. He looked back at the grounds. They stayed that way for a stretch of time, the pool lights fracturing on the water below them, the night working quietly at its edges, and Gladys became aware, without urgency or alarm, of how close he was standing. Not intrusively, not with intent she hadn't invited. Close the way a person stands when they have decided you are worth staying near. You didn't have to do all of this, she said. I know. I mean, she stopped. Started differently. 14 months. The fund, the contracts, the timing down to the ceremony itself. She shook her head slowly. You could have just sent me a letter. Do-Yun turned to look at her then. The full look. Unhurried and without performance. A letter wouldn't have given you the company, he said. She told herself the warmth was gratitude. It was not only gratitude. She looked at his profile. The clean, straight line of his jaw. The tattoo. The absolute stillness of a man who has never needed motion to prove anything. She thought, this man is not safe. She thought immediately after, this man is also the first person in 5 years who has treated my losses like they were worth something. You're going to ask me for something eventually, she said. Everyone does. Do-Yun considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, he said, but not tonight. Gladys looked at him. Tonight, he said. You're allowed to just sit here. She turned back to the pool lights, and somewhere in the wreckage of the worst day she had ever lived through, in the silence of a terrace belonging to the most dangerous man she had ever met, with tea she hadn't asked for, and a company she hadn't known she was about to inherit, Gladys Carter began, quietly and without announcement, to feel like herself again. She thought she had finally seen the last of Chloe's number. She was wrong. Chloe called on a Tuesday morning. Gladys was standing in Do-Yun's kitchen in bare feet, watching Ji-Hai arrange a breakfast she hadn't cooked and would not have to clean up, when her phone lit up with her sister's name on the screen. She looked at it for 3 full rings. Enough time to feel the familiar old pull, the trained reflex of answer, absorb, assist. And then she answered and said nothing. She just held the phone and let the silence do its work first. Gladys. Chloe's voice had that specific texture it deployed when she needed something. Warm at the surface, pressurized directly underneath. I need to talk to you. You're talking. A breath. Recalibrating. Max's accounts are frozen. His lawyers are saying there's a fraud investigation and the company is in some kind of receivership and we don't have access to anything. The hotel sent our luggage to the lobby, Gladys. We were on our honeymoon. I know. The silence on Chloe's end was brief and recalculating. She had expected sympathy. She had expected, at some level, the old Gladys, the one who absorbed impact and kept producing because producing was the only language she had ever been taught to use with people who only knew how to take. I just need a little help, Chloe said. Just to bridge the gap until his lawyers sort it out. You know I'll pay it back. Chloe. Gladys's voice was level. Not cold. Not burning. Something past both of those. The register of a woman who has completed the emotional accounting and arrived somewhere final and unchangeable. You forged my signature. The silence that came back was a different shape. I know about the founding documents, Gladys said. I know you found the originals with both names. I know you sourced someone to produce a second version with only Max's name. I know you brought it to him and told him it solved a problem. She paused. I know you did it because you thought erasing me from the paperwork was a clean way to secure your future. I know you didn't think about what it would do to me for even 1 second while you were doing it. Gladys, I'm not going to help you. She said it the way you state weather. I'm not going to help Max either. Everything that happens to both of you from here is the direct result of decisions you chose to make. I want you to sit with that. She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the counter, stood still for a moment, listening to the fountain in the courtyard through the open window. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it and discovered, to her own quiet surprise, that she felt nothing that needed recovery. Ji-hee appeared with a plate, set it in front of her without comment. Do-yun came in from the direction of his office, already dressed, jacket already on. He passed the counter and glanced at her face, that quick, focused read that she had begun to recognize as his particular method of checking whether she was all right, without requiring her to perform an answer. She called, Gladys said. I know. He poured his own coffee. How do you feel? Like I slept well, Gladys said. The corner of his mouth moved. Good. She made one critical error that first day at Do-yun's estate. She underestimated how fast a desperate man moves when his back hits a wall. Max moved faster than either of them anticipated. By Thursday morning, he had called an emergency board meeting under the pretense of a strategic pivot, packed the room with 2 buyers he had been cultivating for months as exit options, and opened acquisition discussions to dissolve the equity structure, bury the debt, and extract whatever cash remained before the lawyers closed the last gap. Do-yun's man sent the alert at 9:43. By 10:15, Gladys was in a car. She wore charcoal. Hair back. No jewelry except the small gold earrings she had owned since before Max, the ones from her own money, the ones she had never offered to sell when the rent was due. She had spent 4 days inside Do-yun's estate reading every document in that black folder until the architecture of Max's fraud was as familiar to her as her own handwriting. She walked into the 32nd floor boardroom with the original incorporation papers under her arm and Do-yun one step behind her, and the specific stillness of a woman who has already won and is arriving solely to formalize it. Max saw her first. The color left his face in one clean withdrawal, the way a tide pulls back before the wave. He stood at the head of the table in a borrowed suit. She knew it was borrowed by the way the shoulders sat wrong across his frame, and he looked at Gladys and then at Do-yun, and somewhere in the gap between those two looks, something in his expression collapsed through the last of its architecture into the raw truth underneath. This meeting, Do-yun said pleasantly to the room, is adjourned. One of the buyers, a man in his 50s with the settled confidence of someone who had not been surprised in a boardroom in many years, looked up from his term sheet. Excuse me, who are you? I'm the primary debt holder of this company, Do-yun said. The sale of any asset secured against my debt requires written consent, which has not been requested and will not be granted. He pulled a chair from the table and positioned it deliberately at Max's right hand. Max's chair, Max's right. And then looked at Gladys. Whenever you're ready. Gladys set the documents on the table. She did not look at Max. She spoke to the room, to the board members who had bought his mythology, to the buyers who had been presented a version of this company that quietly erased its origins, to the lawyers on Max's side who were already exchanging looks across the table. She walked them through it chronologically: the initial transfer, the incorporation date, the original documents with both names, the second version with one, the forensic handwriting analysis, the $462,000, itemized, dates, account numbers, wire confirmations she had pulled herself from records Max had apparently assumed she would never think to access, because he had spent 5 years watching her absorb, and concluded, fatally, that she was not paying attention. When she finished, the room was very quiet. The buyer in his 50s put his pen down. Max said, Gladys. Don't, she said. It was the first time she had looked directly at him since she walked in. She held the look long enough for him to understand there was nothing left in it. Not anger, not grief, not the ghost of the woman who had eaten overnight oatmeal so his rent would clear. There's nothing left to say to me, she told him. Talk to the lawyers. The legal process was precise and swift in the way of things that have been prepared for months in advance. Do-Yun's firm moved with the particular efficiency of people who already know how a case resolves because they built the case themselves. Max contested 2 clauses. He lost both in 72 hours. His personal accounts, already frozen, were formally assessed against the outstanding debt structure. The intellectual property, the existing contracts, the company's full asset sheet passed into receivership and then out of it, into the hands of the woman, whose name had been on the original documents before someone took the trouble to remove it. The press release went out on a Friday morning. Gladys read it on the terrace with a blanket and morning light instead of pool reflections, holding the strange suspended feeling that arrives when something you have been fighting toward becomes real and the body doesn't know how to process the removal of the fight. What happened between Max and Chloe in the days following was not something she needed to witness directly. Ji-hai summarized the essential parts without editorializing, and the summary was this. The day Max's personal assessment published, Chloe called her mother. Her mother called Max, and Max, cornered and stripped and with nothing left to protect, chose to spend the leverage he had been holding about Chloe's role in the document forgery, the one card he had saved for exactly this kind of desperation. Chloe's attorney filed for annulment on day 41. Max had already moved out of the apartment Chloe had rented on her own card. Gladys thought, sitting on that terrace. I wanted blood once. What she felt now was closer to arithmetic. 2 people had constructed their lives on theft. The theft had been returned. The equation had resolved. Not satisfying, exactly. Just accurate. She was still sitting with that when Do-Yun appeared. He had been different since the boardroom. Not colder. She had learned by now that what looked like coldness in Do-Yun was simply economy. A refusal to use 10 words where 2 would serve. But something had shifted in the days since the legal process closed. The focused, transactional precision of the past 2 weeks had loosened at its edges. He brought her things without explanation, a book with a pencil already in it, a tea she had mentioned wanting once in passing, a heavier blanket than the one Ji-hai had left. He appeared on the terrace in the evenings and stayed longer each time. He asked her questions that had nothing to do with the case. He asked her what she had wanted to be before Max. She told him. Herself. Mostly. A version of myself I hadn't spent 5 years negotiating downward. He had said nothing to that. Just looked at her with that particular attention, the one that had no performance in it. And she had felt the warmth again. The one she had stopped trying to suppress 3 days in. Now he crossed the terrace and sat in the chair beside her instead of standing at the railing. That was new. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool morning air, forearms on his knees, looking out at the grounds, and she waited. The transfer is complete, he said. As of this morning, you're the sole controlling shareholder. A pause. Your legal team will be in touch next week about the board restructure. My legal team? She repeated. I retained them on your behalf. He glanced sideways at her. You can find your own. I won't be offended. Gladys looked at the fountain, the grounds, the long, protected silence of a place that had held her carefully for 2 weeks, while the worst chapter of her life was being dismantled one clause at a time, and something unrecognizable was being built in its foundation. Why did you really do this? She asked. Not the legal answer. The real one. Do-Yun was quiet in the way she had learned to read as precision, not evasion. The first time I saw your name on a document, I assumed it was a clerical error, he said. The second time, I hired someone to find out who you were. He turned to face her fully. I read 47 pages of financial records before there was a single photograph. 1. A brief pause. I looked at it for a long time. Gladys held very still. I am not a man who does things without reason, he said. Every step of this, the fund, the contracts, the timing of the ceremony, had a reason. Something in his voice shifted, opening slightly, The way a very controlled person sounds when they make the deliberate choice to be honest about something they have been managing with great care. But the reason was never the revenge. She thought, he built a 14-month trap for a man he didn't care about, to hand a woman he had never spoken to the life she was owed. She thought, nobody has ever done anything like that for me. She thought, I should be more afraid of what that means than I am. The morning light was finding the places in his face where the edges gave way to something unguarded, and Gladys thought about the hand at the altar. The tea she hadn't asked for. You're allowed to just sit here. 47 pages before the photograph. Do-yun, she said. I know what I am, he said, before she could continue. I know what my world is. I'm not asking you to decide anything today. He turned toward her completely. No folder, no architecture of strategy between them. Just a man sitting close in the morning light whose long game had always, from the very beginning, had her name written at the end of it. I'm asking if you'll let me try to be something good for you. I'm asking if that door exists. Gladys looked at him for a long moment. She thought about who she had been 2 weeks ago, standing at the back of a beachfront wedding in a purple dress, calculating the total cost of her own erasure, taking 2 steps toward an ocean she had considered not stopping at. She thought about who she was this morning, a controlling shareholder, a woman whose name was on documents that could not be forged away again, a woman who had said no to her sister without her hand shaking. She thought about what it meant that the most dangerous man she had ever been near was sitting beside her in morning light, with every wall down, looking at her like she was the only answer to a question that had taken him 14 months and 47 pages and 1 photograph to finally ask out loud. She reached out and took his jaw in her hand, deliberate, unhurried, the way he had been with her since the first second. The way of someone who does not need urgency because they have already decided, and the deciding is the whole point. She brought his face toward hers and kissed him. Not softly. Not with hesitation. The way a woman kisses someone when the decision is made and she has no intention of walking it back. Do-yun went completely still for exactly 1 second. Surprised, she realized. This man who had planned everything, who had read 47 pages and built a fund and crashed a wedding and waited, was surprised. That 1 second satisfied her more than she could have anticipated. Then his hand came up and curved around the back of her neck, and he kissed her back with a precision and a tenderness that felt like every restrained, careful, deliberate thing he had ever done for her. Every cup of tea, every document, every evening on the terrace, finally released from its own architecture and completely, entirely unguarded. When she pulled back, his hand stayed where it was. His eyes were open, looking at her. Just that. That door exists, Gladys said. For the first time since she had known him, Do-yun smiled. Not the half-second flicker at the edge of his mouth she had catalogued over dinner. A real one. Slow, rare, entirely for her. Outside, the fountain ran its quiet loop. The grounds held their private silence. Somewhere across the city, in an office building on the 32nd floor, a boardroom was being prepared for its new owner, the woman whose name had always been the answer, even when someone had taken the trouble to erase it. Gladys Carter was in no hurry. For the first time in 5 years, she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and no one had charged her a single thing for it. But Do-yun's world does not let its people rest for long, and the man who funded Max's trap had enemies of his own. Enemies who had been watching the same boardroom from a different angle, waiting to see if the new controlling shareholder was worth targeting. The company was hers. The danger was only beginning. Gladys didn't just get her money back. She took his entire empire, destroyed his new marriage, and walked away with the most dangerous, obsessive man in Seoul. That is how you level up. Before you click off, drop a comment right now and tell me the unfiltered truth. Did Gladys let her sister Chloe off too easy at the end, or did Chloe get exactly what she deserved? I want to know what you would have done. Let me know down below. If you are addicted to high-stakes corporate revenge, massive glow-ups, and terrifying Korean mafia bosses who protect their black queens at all costs, you need to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. Welcome to the Afro-Korean Storyverse. I'll see you in the next one.